Good morning, guys. Today we're going to take notes on the causes and events of World War II. A lot of the information that you're going to see and hear today you might be familiar with. We're going to concentrate on the main causes of the war. We're going to concentrate on the events that are key. A lot of them are going to be very significant as far as turning points of the war or bringing different powers in. While the PowerPoint is playing, you can ask the substitute to pause at any time if you need to. It's just going to run like a normal YouTube video. If you're going too fast, you can try to slow down by having them break up the information. So here we go. The 6 causes that you guys need to know. We have aggression by totalitarian powers. If you remember from last class, the totalitarian powers during World War II are the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese. The second cause is nationalism. This is, glorification of one country. It is valuing the nation and the race over the individual. We have the failure of the Treaty of Versailles. We learned about that last unit. The Treaty of Versailles is going to fail. A lot of the countries don't support it. It's going to negatively impact the German people, and it will not stand the next 20 years. We have the weakness of the League of Nations. League of Nations is going to fail. The United States, the Soviet Union, and Germany are not a part of the League of Nations. And the League of Nations had no military to enforce its decision. So the League of Nations is basically going to fail in the 20 years after World War I because it cannot force the Germans or these totalitarian powers to follow its rulings. Number 5 is appeasement. That's a new word for you guys. We'll get into some specifics about that later on. And number 6 is isolationism. Again, a new vocab word for you guys that we'll talk about a little bit later on. As far as the Americans are concerned, they're really going to try to stay out of the war in Europe until December 7th of 1941. All right, aggression by totalitarian powers. So early in 1938 and in 1939, the Germans are going to start basically taking up smaller pieces throughout Europe. They're going to start in a territory of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. They're going to move into the rest of Czechoslovakia. They're going to take territory in Austria, and then the breaking point will be their invasion of Poland, September 1st of 1939. Italy is going to invade Ethiopia. We talked about that last class. Following the Berlin Conference of 1884, Ethiopia is one of the only independent nations in Africa. And Mussolini is trying to rebuild the glory of old Rome. So he's going to take Ethiopia as a territory, and the king of Ethiopia flees to England. The Japanese themselves are going to take a lot of territory in Eastern Asia, including the Korean Peninsula, which they win in 1904 from the Russo-Japanese War. They're going to take Manchuria, and they invade China. So you guys can see on this slide the Sudetenland, the reference territory in the previous slide is in this like baby poop-ish brown color. This is the start of German territorial aggression from September 30th, 1938 to November 1st of 1938. War is finally declared the following fall in September of 1939. This is the Italian territorial aggression in Africa. Mussolini and the Italian army are going to land in Ethiopia and take the territory. And the Japanese, everything you guys see in red is the peak of the Japanese Empire in 1942. One of the things you're going to have to remember about this map is early in the war, or early in the American intervention in the war, 1942, the Americans are going to install something called island hopping. The idea comes about that in order to get close enough to attack the Japanese mainland, the American forces would have to battle and take islands to get close enough to the Japanese to bomb mainland Japan. All right, second cause is nationalism. This is a word we've seen time and time again. It's a very important vocab word. Nationalism is going to allow for the rise of Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. The third one is the failure of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany is going to start building up a military going against both the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations, and they stop paying war reparations. The fourth cause is the weakness of the League of Nations. As you guys remember from our talk on World War I, Germany, the United States, and Russia are not even members. The League lacked the enforcement and military to make those countries follow the decisions, and the weakness of the League of Nations is going to lead directly into the next stages of the start of the war. If you guys look, this is a political cartoon discussing the weakness of the League of Nations. This comes out in American newspapers in the late 1920s, early 1930s. All right, appeasement is the fifth cause. Appeasement is making concessions to an aggressor in order to avoid war. As Hitler is going to start expanding the German territory in Europe, other European leaders, guys like Neville Chamberlain, are going to give in to his tiny little demands. But every time that happens, the next time around, Hitler is just going to demand more and demand more. In your notes, there's a reference to a kid's book. Some of you guys may have read it when you were little, called If You Give the Mouse a Cookie, where basically the idea of the book, or the premise, is that the minute you give in to someone's demands, they're going to keep demanding more. That's what appeasement is. Appeasement is giving in to an aggressor's demands, thus creating, next time, more demands because you just gave in the first time. If you look, this map is showing the German conquest in Europe from 1939 to 1942. Hitler's army is going to make it as far east as Stalingrad and as far west as London, with aerial attacks over Great Britain, and as far southwest as into Spain by 1942. Isolationism is the sixth cause. This is the policy of avoiding political or military involvement with other countries. The U.S. and other countries did not immediately get involved in World War II. FDR was elected on the premise that he was going to fix the economy in the U.S. and not get involved in another European war. That's going to change in late 1941. So here's another political cartoon from an American newspaper. This is the late 1930s, early 1940s. Question mark on the left, can we afford to help Europe? Question mark on the right, can we afford not to help Europe? With the economy still recovering in the United States, many politicians especially had questions on whether or not the United States could stand by and allow Hitler to continue to take over territory in Europe, continue to threaten the British. These were all of our trading partners. And by them going to war, we were losing a lot of money in our newly recovering economy. All right, so here are the 7 events that you guys need to know for World War II. Again, many of them you may have heard of before. I'll read through the 7. The German invasion of Poland is first, followed by the fall of France, the Battle of Great Britain, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Pearl Harbor, D-Day, and the dropping of the atomic bombs. That's the last event. Characteristics. So World War II, unlike World War I, World War I was divided into fronts. We had the Western Front in France, and we had the Eastern Front along the Austrian-Hungarian and Russian border. Because World War II was so massive, we had fighting in Africa, and we had fighting in Europe, and we had fighting in East Asia. This war, World War II, is divided into what are called theaters. Basically theaters of operations, or theaters of fighting. So the European theater is the Allies. It's the British and the French and the Soviets against Germany and Italy. The Pacific theater post-1941 is going to be the United States versus Japan. Some of the Allies sent troops to the Pacific theater. For example, the British are going to send Australian troops to fight for the island hopping campaign in the Pacific. All right, first event you guys need to know, this is officially the start of World War II, September 1st, 1939. This is the German invasion of Poland. Germany and France, 2 days following the German invasion of Poland, are going to declare war on Germany. That happens on September 3rd, 1939. All right, looking at this map, you guys can see how quickly the Polish military collapses. Remember, Poland was only created following the end of World War I. It was the majority of land taken from the Russians that they had surrendered to Germany in 1917. So the Polish military is nowhere near qualified to deal with the German invasion. So while all this is going on, Germany and the Soviet Union had secretly signed what's called a non-aggression pact. You guys should star circle and highlight this non-aggression pact. The idea between Hitler and Stalin was that Hitler would invade Poland, conquer it quickly, the Soviets would kind of allow for it to happen, and then the Germans would divide Poland in half, giving the Soviet Union the other half. So Poland is completely overrun by the German military by October 1st, so a month following the start of the war. The Polish military is done, and the Germans have conquered the entire territory. This is a picture of the German and Russian officials at the signing of the non-aggression pact. You guys can see Stalin in the back right-hand side. He's the one wearing the gray coat with the button up, single breast buttons going down the coat. Whenever you see pictures of Stalin during this era, he's always in this gray wool single button coat. Number 2 is the fall of France. So June 25th, 1940, the Germans are going to use a tactic called a blitzkrieg to break through the French defenses, and the French defense was called the Maginot Line. If you guys remember from World War I, as the Germans are launching their attack through Belgium, the French kind of meet the Germans along the Western Front, and they establish this entrenchment or trench warfare. The French are not going to get the opportunity during World War II to meet the German attack head on. The Germans use this blitzkrieg, and those of you who are football fans or play football, you know what a blitz is, right? A blitz is taking your defensive lineman or taking your secondary, and you're sending them at the quarterback as quickly as possible. It's the same idea. Blitz, the term blitz in football, comes from the German term blitzkrieg. By late June, the last pieces of the French army surrender, and Paris is basically given over to the Germans. You guys have a line in your notes asking you about the French border defenses. It's this term here, the Maginot Line. So that's the important piece that you have to write down in your notes on that. Again, here's the Maginot Line located south of the Luxembourg and Belgium border. They're no match for the German army, and they fall very quickly. The third event you need to know is the Battle of Britain. This is July 1940 to May of 1941. This is an aerial battle. This word here, aerial, meaning all the fighting took place in the skies. All the fighting took place between planes. This was a period of time where the Germans used their planes. They were called the German Luftwaffe. It was the German Air Force. Versus the British, they're the British RAF, or the Royal Air Force. This is the period of time where the British are going to suffer the greatest losses.